Hi, it's great to be with you today, and I want to talk about probably the most famous story in the Bible, the story of David and Goliath, and I want to talk about the spirit of David as he faced Goliath. Because I reckon whatever your situation in life, you've got some Goliaths that you need to face up to. And there's something that we can learn from this story about the kind of the spirit of how God builds that into us and how God uses us to stand down the Goliaths in our life. Some of you, just a bit of context, some of you might have heard of Pastor Byron Marchand, who's our Equippers Hutt City pastor, but he also runs a branding or strategy marketing firm. And a few years ago, he talked a lot about brand archetypes. An archetype is defined as a whole coherent pattern of behavior and values and ethos and style and spirit. So here's some examples of them, like an outlaw or a revolutionary archetype. That's like Richard Branson with Virgin and Harley Davidson, or the magician archetype, Disney and Coca-Cola, creating moments of magic. The hero archetype, Nike or Adidas or FedEx, just do it, we get it done. The lover archetype, Chanel or Alfa Romeo. The jester archetype, M&M's. The everyman archetype, like Kiwi Bank or Target or Lynx. The caregiver archetype, UNICEF or World Wildlife Fund. The ruler archetype, Mercedes-Benz or Rolex. The creator archetype, like Lego and Apple. The innocent archetype, Dove soap. The sage archetype, BBC or Oxford University. The explorer archetype, Jeep or North Face. And you see these kind of archetypes even in film. You know, the explorer, Indiana Jones. The sage, Yoda or Gandalf. The hero, Russell Crowe as Maximus in Gladiator or Jack Reacher. And the everyman, it's like in The Lord of the Rings, the hobbits who become the true heroes. And it's even like this in church. Different churches have a different kind of feel to them. And so like in Equippers, we call our youth Revolution Youth or Revo Youth, because we want it to have that kind of feel. We're not just here to keep the status quo. We're here to make a difference. And a few weeks ago, I was going to be speaking to a group of churches, and I felt to speak about the story of David and Goliath, and I knew Pastor Byron had kind of worked a bit with them, so I said to them, hey, what do you think their archetype is? And he made this interesting statement. He said, I feel like they're like the everyman who dreams of becoming the hero and the champion. And I was like, that's the story of David and Goliath. And I feel like for all of us, that's part of our story. I'm just the unknown, insignificant everybody that nobody would notice, but something inside of me dreams of standing up and becoming a hero or champion. And David was the everyday, unknown young shepherd boy who in a moment became the hero and champion of a nation, and eventually became the king and brought in the rule of God. And I just want to suggest to you that there's some part of your life where you need to carry that spirit. There's some part of your life, actually, you have a mandate from heaven to step up and be the hero and be the champion and bring in the rule of God. So it's a bit of a long story. It's found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. I want to kind of tell the story, just summarize it to get the feel of the spirit of it. So chapter 17, it just talks about how the Philistines gathered their forces for war. We are in a battle, and there are things that for your life that are opposed, and they assembled at a certain place, and Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped opposite, and it just says they drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. But it was kind of like it was stuck. It was not happening, because verse 3, the Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another. And it's like, for some of us, we're just stuck, and we're not advancing God's purpose in our life and in our families and in our businesses and in our vocations and in our careers and in our towns and communities and cities and nations. And the reason is verse 4, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out, and he's a giant, and he intimidated them. Verse 8, he stood and shouted at the ranks of Israel, and he mocked them. And it just says in verse 11, on hearing the Philistines' word, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. It's like it's at this impasse where an intimidating spirit is stopping the people of God advancing. And I love in verse 12, it just says, now David. And it talks about how he was the youngest of 8 sons of this guy, Jesse. And the 3 oldest are in the army. He's the youngest, so he's just looking after the sheep. But verse 16, for 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. 40 days is like a symbol of trial and testing, and they were stuck. They weren't advancing until David broke the deadlock. And I just believe for some of us, something needs to get hold of our spirits, that we stand up and we go, I'm going to break this impasse. I'm not prepared to keep stuck at this place. And so he's sent by his dad as a delivery boy to take lunch to his brothers. And it just says, interesting, his dad says in verse 19 to them, they are with Saul and all the men, they're fighting against the Philistines. No, they weren't fighting, they're playing games. They're pretending to fight, but something in them is intimidated and they're not engaging the enemy. And it just says, verse 20, David reached the camp. And it just gets more and more tragic. Verse 20, he reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry. For 40 days, they had got up, got dressed, put on all the army, sang all the songs, made all the declarations, walked out and made sure they never engaged their enemy. And I reckon there's some people who are like, I'm sick of playing games. It's time for something to shift. I'm sick of singing the songs, making the noises, and never seeing the enemies fall. And the spirit of David is a different spirit. And it just says in verse 20, he reached the camp as they're going out. In verse 21, they're drawing up their lines. Verse 22, David ran to the battle lines. There's a different spirit that says, if I see an enemy, I'm going after it. I'm not prepared to live intimidated by this thing. And Goliath comes out, verse 24, whenever the Israelites saw the man, they fled from him. The army sings all the right songs, makes all the right noises, but they run away. David carries a different spirit. He runs towards the battle. And so he's offended. He's indignant. Verse 26, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Interesting, his first reaction is not from the Philistine, it's from the Israelites and specifically from his brothers. His older brother, I know how conceited you are, how wicked your heart is. And we often mistake kind of godly confidence and indignation for arrogance. And it's like, and religion will mock that, but there's got to be a group of people who go, no, I'm indignant that God's purposes are being held back. I'm indignant that we're stuck. I'm indignant that people are stuck in oppression. Something should shift this, and religion will put you down rather than going, you carry a spirit that we need. And so David, incredible kind of verse 32, he turns to the king of his nation. The national armies assembled, and as a young 16-year-old shepherd boy says this, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine, your servant will go and find him. He's like, it's all right, guys, I got this. And again, it's like, everyone else is like, that's conceit. No, it's not. It's a holy indignation at the impasse that the enemy's created. And Saul's like, no, you can't. And that's where David tells this famous passage, no, this is not my first rodeo. This is not just youthful indignation. It says, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. And he's like, I actually have fought some battles. You might not know about them, but God has done some stuff in my life. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about how God's preparing some of us. And so then the next thing, Saul tries to dress him in his own armor. And David puts it on. He's like, I can't do this. Don't try and pull me into the system and make me fight according to the rules of the system. I actually need to stay free from all of the stuff. And I know who I am and I know who I'm called to do. And it's like, I can't fight a giant in hand-to-hand combat with a sword. But I know how to be a shepherd boy with a sling. And so if you know, he goes out there and he challenges Goliath again. And verse 48, again, David ran quickly towards the battle. Twice, this is a crazy guy. He runs towards the enemy. He runs towards the opposition. Show me something that's opposing God and I'm going to go after it. Let me in the battle because I'm confident, not in a youthful arrogance. I'm not confident in who I am. I'm confident in God and what he will do if I'll commit to going into the battle. And so if you know, he uses a sling, hits Goliath, he falls. Verse 50, so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. And it's like, what an incredible story of a spirit. And I guarantee there's some area of your life where you need to carry that spirit, and that thing that's been intimidating you and got you stuck, something needs to catch in your spirit and rise up against that. But part of what I want to say today is actually the reason why that happened is because the story doesn't start in chapter 17. The story starts in chapter 16. And without 1 Samuel chapter 16, there would never be a 1 Samuel chapter 17. And 1 Samuel 16 is all about how God had prepared him in a secret place. And some of you now who are wondering, like, what is God doing? I want you to be encouraged. I want you to hear this like a roadmap. Oh man, I'm ticking these boxes. Like, this is what God is doing. He's preparing me now for the moment when he propels me into my destiny and my purpose. And maybe some of you are a bit further on. God will use this to cause you to remember things and realize, yeah, in the middle of the battle where it feels confusing and I feel a bit overwhelmed, I need to go back and remember, oh yeah, God prepared me. God set me up. God's got me ready for this moment. I can do this. So again, 1 Samuel chapter 16, if you know the story, Samuel is told by God to anoint a new king, and it's one of the sons of Jesse. So this guy Jesse, so he goes and finds him, finds the eldest son. Again, famous passage, looks at the eldest guy and man, this must be the guy. He's awesome. God's like, verse 7, don't consider his appearance or his height. I've rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so they go through all the sons. And here's the point. Samuel's confused, like, but God hasn't shown me one yet. Is this it? And Jesse's like, oh, there is another one, the youngest, but he just looks after the sheep. He was unknown. He was not even rated by his own father as a possibility. If you feel like you're forgotten, if you feel like you're overlooked, if you feel like no one understands what you carry in your heart, I want to tell you, you're the right recipient for the purpose of God and the destiny of God. And so they finally bring David. God says, this is the one. So it says, verse 13, so Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And here's a verse I've never really noticed before, but it's important. From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. He wasn't just a cocky young teenager. He was someone who'd had encounters with God. And then actually before the David and Goliath, his first incidents of ministry is Saul is being tormented by an evil spirit. They're like, we need to get someone who can play some music to calm this guy down. Verse 18, one of the servants says, I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. Yeah, he's a brave man and a warrior, but the Lord is with him. And so, oh man, this was David's setup. So I just want to quickly tell you 10 things that could be like on the roadmap of pointers that locate you in how God is taking you as the everyman and turning you into the hero and champion. And so quickly, number one, he was unknown, unseen, ordinary, and humble. As I said, even his dad didn't even rate him. Even his dad didn't even put him in the mix. God always uses the ordinary. You know, and any culture has parts that are good and parts that need to be redeemed. New Zealand culture, we actually struggle with that champion thing. We struggle with the tall poppy thing, you know, national color of black, national bird, national symbol, not a lion or an eagle, but a kind of semi-blind, flightless bird that lives in a hole in the ground called a kiwi. And it's like, so we struggle to shine. But actually, we're good at this first part. And there's a great story about the kiwi. It's a myth, but it actually embodies kingdom culture. And I want to read this because it embodies the kind of spirit that we can carry and the kind of spirit that was at the heart of what David carried. It just says this, one day Tani Mahuta, the god of the forest, was walking through the forest. He looked at his children reaching for the sky, and he noticed that they were starting to sicken as bugs were eating them. So the trees are all starting to die. And he talks to his brother, the god of the birds, and says, man, I need one of the birds to go down and live on the ground to eat the bugs to protect the trees. And I wonder who we could get to do that. And so they turned to the tui and said, Tui, will you come down? And the tui looks around and he looks down and it's cold and dark. And he's like, oh, I'm too scared. I don't want to go down there. So they turned to the pukeko and said, would you go down? And he's like, oh, it's too damp and I don't want to get my feet wet. And so they turned to the cuckoo and go, would you go down? He's like, oh, I'm just busy building my nest. And it just says everyone was quiet and sad because they realized that the forest is going to die. And so then they turned to Kiwi and, will you go down? And Kiwi, it says, Kiwi looked at the trees, saw the sun filtering through the leaves. Kiwi looked around and saw his family. He looked at the cold, damp earth. Looking around once more, he turned and said, I will go. And everyone was real happy, but then Tani Mahuta said he felt like he needed to warn Kiwi. Kiwi, do you realize that if you do this, you will have to grow thick, strong legs so that you can rip apart the logs? You will lose your beautiful colored feathers and wings so that you will never be able to return to the forest roof. You will never see the light of day again. All was quiet, not a bird spoke. Kiwi took one last look at the sun filtering through the trees, took one last look at the other birds, their wings and their bright-colored feathers, and he said a silent goodbye. Looking around, he turned and said, I will go. And the story goes on, kind of kingdom values. The first will be last, the greatest will be least. How then, to the tui, oh, well, you were too scared, and from now you'll wear the white feathers of a coward. To the pukeko, you will live in the swamps and walk there. To the kuku, you'll never again have your own nest. But it finishes by saying this, but you, Kiwi, because of your great sacrifice, you will become the most well-known and the most loved bird of them all. And I want to tell you that's a myth of New Zealand tangata whenua Māori culture, but it embodies kingdom culture. God uses the ordinary, the humble, the servanthood. But here's the thing about David, he learned to serve. Where was he? He's tending the sheep. That's the despised role. That's not important. But Psalm 78 says this, he chose David as servant. Verse 17, took him from the sheep pens, from tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people Jacob. And again, I want to say, if you feel no one's seeing what you're doing, you're in training for your destiny. You're in training for your purpose. I remembered, I've been in ministry like 38 years. I started in Taranaki as a youth worker, and we had different youth groups all around the little towns around the mountain. And so, like Monday night in Waitara, Tuesday maybe in, Stratford, Wednesday in part of New Plymouth. And I have this distinct memory of driving home late at night from Waitara back home to New Plymouth. And I don't really remember it, just that feeling of having gone and served and driving home. And looking back now, I realize something was formed there. And now I might, when COVID's over, be on a plane coming back from Europe, or a plane coming back from the States, or a plane coming back from Dunedin or whatever, but it's the same feeling. And I learned it in a secret place where nobody saw. And so I want you to know, if you feel like, what God's doing? No, He's teaching you how to serve, which leads to the third thing about David. It was all founded in worship. We know him as a king. We know him as a warrior, but actually we know him as the writer of a whole lot of Psalms. And again, out in the wilderness with no one around, he wrote songs and worshiped God. And I love the fact when they were looking for someone to calm Saul, they just said this, he knows how to play the lyre and God is with him. And again, when I look back, I remember as a teenager just 3 or 4 chords on a guitar, just singing for hours to God. And looking back now, like something was formed in those moments. I was just a nobody, but I learned to serve in ministry and I learned to worship Jesus. And I want to say again, you're not forgotten. Those moments when nobody knows that you're in your room worshiping Jesus, God is setting you up for your purpose, which leads to the fourth thing. He fought for secret victories. Those things, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried it off, I went after and struck it down. Again, I think of incidents when I was a young youth worker where there was opposition, where there were battles and we overcame. I lead Equippers College and the pastors often say some of the greatest things that are achieved through college has got nothing to do with college, nothing to do with the curriculum. It's the victory that's one of faith when people, how am I going to live? Where am I going to live? Where's the money going to come from? But in a few years' time, when they step up and go, man, I feel called to plant this thing, they carry a faith that has won their own victories. And again, I want to say, don't underestimate the victories that you're winning in private, how you've battled through on those things that other people might not even know about or other people might not think are important, but they set you up for your moment. You're an everyman, overlooked person, but you're learning how to serve, you're learning how to worship, you're learning how to have victories. And the fifth thing about David's setup was this, he was anointed. God was with him. And again, I haven't really noticed this before. Verse 13, from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. He's not just a cocky young shepherd. Again, when nobody had seen, God's Spirit had touched him. He had had encounters. He had felt calling, dreams and destiny and purpose was birthed in his spirit. Don't underestimate those moments. You might go, but nothing's happening. No, trust that God orders your days, and 1 Samuel 16 is the roadmap that sets you up for your 1 Samuel 17. Because in the moment when everyone else just wants to play games and sing the songs and is intimidated, because that's been formed in you, something will step up and go, how dare this happen? I know my God. I know how to serve. I know how to win victories. I know how to worship. And this thing's got to go down in my day. Which kind of leads, again, maybe if you're a bit further on, can I encourage you, go back and remember those things. Write down those experiences of encounter, those experiences of learning to serve, those experiences of victory. Go back and remember them, because that's your foundation. But just let me highlight a couple of things that actually happened in the moment. Number 6, he was indignant at the enemy. That was mistaken for conceit, but it was actually confidence in his God. Again, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? His brothers, I know how conceited you are. No, let no one lose heart on account of this. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. And it's like, man, all those gathered around will know that it's not by the sword or spear that the Lord saves. There's something in us that has to get indignant about how people are being robbed of purpose. People are being robbed of freedom. How you are being robbed of freedom and purpose. And this indignation, there's an account of John of Jesus raising Lazarus. And it says Jesus, in English translation, says Jesus was deeply moved. In Greek, it's actually the word of a horse snorting. And it's like Jesus standing in front of his dead friend. Something in him, I mean, I can't do it, but it's kind of like, he's just angry, he's indignant, he's sad, he's moved. And it's like, something's got to break through here. And I want to challenge you that God sometimes uses holy indignation. It's not good enough that our teenagers are committing suicide. It's not good enough that kids are growing up in damp houses and poverty. It's not good enough that 90% of our cities don't know Jesus. Something has to rise up and look the enemy in the face and go, how dare you? And I may be a nobody, I may be like the Hobbit, but I'm going to be a champion for the cause of God. And enemy, you're going down. Which leads to point number 7, when he ran towards the battle. Crazy. Twice it says he ran towards the battle. Everyone else is running away, he's running towards the battle. And something in us needs to be, man, I just need to get in the midst of this thing. I need to get involved with that school. I need to get involved with that board of trustees. I need to get involved in what's going on in this hospital ward I'm working in, or in this business. I need to get involved in my suburb, in my town. Just let me get in the midst of this, because I'm confident in my God that something is going to happen. Which kind of leads to point 8, that he was agile. Again, there's an enemy that wants to engage him according to certain rules. There's a supposed king who wants him to engage. Like, just put on this armor, take up this sword, this is how we do it. David's like, I can't do this way. I gotta be free to come in an opposite spirit. And he wants to engage me in hand-to-hand combat. I gotta be free to do this differently. And, in this time of a lot of stress and tension, Kerry Newhoff is a leadership consultant. He said, there's organizations that are failing because they're led by frozen leaders. I don't know what to do. This isn't my fault. We couldn't have seen this happening. There's organizations that are just surviving because they're led by hesitant leaders. I think we can get through this and soon we'll get back to normal. But there's organizations that are thriving because they're led by agile leaders. And he's got this great statement. Flexibility is your ability, agility is your superpower. And it's like, man, we need some people who go, I'm not going to get tied up in the system. I'm going to trust God to be agile and move and think up new things, because how we've done things before hasn't seen this thing go down. And in my generation, this is going to shift. And I need to not get tied up in what the world says how I should do this. It's funny how in the Bible, Solomon actually often says, hey, we can learn stuff from nature. Like sluggard, go to the ant and consider its ways. I was speaking at an Easter camp. It was in a rural setting. I went for a walk one day amongst all these trees. All of the birds fly away when you walk in there, except for one bird, the piwakawaka or fantail. It flies towards you. And so this fantail comes and hovers just in front of me, and then it hops over here and hovers, and it hops there and hovers, and it hops here, follows me along as I'm walking through this grass. People are like, oh, they're just social birds. No, they're not. They know you're a threat, and every other bird flies away from the threat. But the fantail knows that you're going to stir up insects. And what it knows is this: it's confident in its agility and its ability to go close to the threat. Like David, it goes towards the battle, confident enough that in its agility it can stay safe, but it can seize the opportunities of the moment. And we need some people who get that kind of spirit. Man, there are opportunities. Everyone else is intimidated and running away and scared. Runs towards the battle, David does. You need to run towards your battle, confident in the ability of the Spirit to help you grab the opportunities created by this moment. And so it's like, man, David did this amazing thing. Let me finish with two more things, though, that happen afterwards. Again, the chapters aren't inspired. People put them in to help, and they're generally helpful. But I feel like the end of chapter 17 cuts off the final conclusion to this. Because chapter 18 verse 1 says this: after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David. And I want to say number 9 is this. So there's the chapter 16, what sets you up for your moment. There's the chapter 17 in the moment. But I want to talk about two consequences of the moment. And number 9 is this: the spirit that was in David found expression in covenant relationship. You see, if you're willing to step up and defy the spirit of intimidation, there's going to be other people who carry a same spirit, and they're going to want to partner with you, and together we could see something incredible happen. And it's like Jonathan, the son of the king's like, I want to stand with you, David, because I love what you carry and it resonates in me. And we might start something of a whole lot of people together that go, in our day, a whole lot of everyday, ordinary people might together step up and see something significant happen for God. Which kind of leads to point number 10. Not only in the moment did people partner with him, but he actually replicated that kind of spirit by empowering relationships with a whole other generation. In 1 Samuel 22, it talks about when David goes to this cave of Adullam. Verse 2, it just says, all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander, about 400. A whole lot of ordinary, struggling, everyday people came to David. But if you go to the end of David's life, 2 Samuel 28, this is what it said. These are the names of David's mighty warriors. See, it wasn't that David was just an ordinary man who became a champion, but he inspired a whole lot of other ordinary, everyday people who felt like failures, who felt like disgrace, who felt like they didn't have anything. They became mighty because they carried the same spirit. And you see this, verse 9, the Israelites retreated, but Eleazar stood his ground. That's that same spirit. Verse 11 and 12, Israel's troops fled from them, but Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. Verse 16, 3 mighty warriors broke through the Philistines' lines. Verse 17, such were the exploits of the 3 mighty warriors. And if you go over to 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 10, these are the chiefs of David's mighty warriors. They together with all Israel gave his kingship strong support, this, to extend it over the whole land as the Lord has promised. And it's like God takes an everyday guy and propels him to be a hero and champion. And because of that, not only he unlocks something, but he unlocks it for a whole generation of people that together rise up and become heroes and champions and extend the rule of God in their day. I want to both encourage you and I want to provoke you and I want to challenge you. Where's your Goliath? Where's your Goliath? Where are you humiliated? Where are you intimidated? Where are you stuck? Let God form you as He formed David in a secret place, till something rises up in you, indignant, that runs towards the battle, confident in your God. And then you'll see a whole lot of other people come and join with you. And together we might see something incredible happen for God. Don't be afraid. Don't fear. But allow God, like He did with David, to take you from the everyman to be the champion and hero who becomes the king. I pray that you're blessed and encouraged and inspired to make a difference in your life, in your family, in your school, in your workplace, in your generation. God bless.